In my house, my husband had an affair with the woman next door. What I did when I found out that shocked everyone. I'll never forget the moment I opened my husband's phone and read that message. Just one single line. But it was enough to make my entire world collapse in an instant. I can still smell you from yesterday morning in your bedroom. Be careful or your wife might find out. I read it over and over again, barely believing my eyes. Not because I had never suspected anything, but because I didn't want to believe that the uneasy feeling I had in my gut was actually right. And the sender was Vanessa, the woman who lived right next door. The neighbor who always smiled politely, who baked cookies and brought them over whenever I got home late from business trips. My husband, Miles, was in the shower at the time. I was going through his coat pocket looking for something when his phone started buzzing nonstop. I didn't mean to check it, but the preview of that message popped up on the lock screen. I tapped on it. Just once. It was the first time in my life I ever went through his phone. We had been married for 12 years. I was an interior architect who had turned down more than a few major projects just to be home for family dinners. And he was an aerospace engineer. The kind of man I believed was quiet, kind, and would never do anything to betray me. But as I scrolled through the rest of their messages, everything became painfully clear. They had been flirting, texting, even mocking me behind my back for 8 months. Little whispers like, "Did you see the new dress Julia bought?" Or, "My wife has a client meeting today, want to come over?" This wasn't just cheating. It was a deep, brutal cut into my self-worth. I stood frozen in the living room. The house I once called my safe space now felt cold and unfamiliar. The same couch where he used to hold me every night was now the place from where he sent lies to a woman just steps away from my front door. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt empty. That entire evening, I said nothing to Miles. I made dinner like usual. I asked about his day, about the aircraft he was working on, and he kept talking like he hadn't just shattered my world behind my back. But inside me, something had shifted. I was no longer the blindly trusting wife. I was no longer the woman who tried to understand and forgive every mistake. I became someone else. Someone who knew her husband was lying to her and chose to stay silent, waiting for the right moment. That night, I went to bed early and pretended to be tired. I turned my back to him and closed my eyes. But in my mind, everything was racing. How could I fight back without losing myself? How could I make them feel what it's like to be betrayed in your own home? When Miles came into the room and laid down beside me, I kept my breathing steady. He whispered, "I love you. Sleep well." I whispered back, "Yeah. Good night." But in my heart, a plan was already starting to take shape. After that night, I was no longer the woman who believed love could conquer everything. I was no longer the wife who would sit and wait for a confession. I had moved past the silent heartbreak. Now, it was time to watch, take notes, and prepare. Miles had no idea what I'd seen, and that was my greatest advantage. I started by documenting everything that felt off. His work schedule, the times he got home, the secretive calls he made when I was in the room. Every little detail, I wrote it down, like a detective building a file on a suspect. I remember one Monday morning vividly. Miles had just come out of the shower. He walked past me and placed a gentle kiss on my forehead like he always did. But what made my spine go cold was the long strand of pale blonde hair on the collar of his white dress shirt. I'm not the paranoid type, but I know my hair. I have dark brown, shoulder-length hair. That one wasn't mine. I carefully plucked it off and placed it between 2 sheets of white paper, sliding it into the drawer of my desk. Not because I needed hard evidence, but because I needed a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining what was happening around me. I reached out to an old friend, a security technician, and asked for help installing hidden cameras. One went in the backyard, facing the kitchen entrance. Another inside, tucked between the bookshelf, pointed toward the living room sofa. The same place Miles had recently started spending a lot of time texting and laughing to himself. I didn't tell anyone. Not my family. Not even Lena. Because when I finally spoke up, I wanted to have everything in my hands. No doubts. No room for denial. 3 days later, I got my first video. It was Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. I opened the app and my heart stopped. Vanessa. She was wearing a sleeveless beige dress, holding something wrapped in cloth. She glanced around, then opened the backyard gate like it was her own house. She walked straight to the kitchen door, typed in the passcode, and it opened. I sat there in the meeting room watching it happen, feeling like my heart had just been ripped out. How did she know the code? How could she walk into my home so casually? A few minutes later, Miles entered the frame. He hugged her from behind, placed a kiss on the back of her neck like it was routine. Then they disappeared out of sight. I didn't want to imagine what happened next in my bedroom. I closed the app. Someone in the meeting was presenting a multi-million-dollar project. But I couldn't hear a word. My mind had gone completely blank. That evening, I came home earlier than usual. As I stepped inside, I tried to feel everything. The scent of the candle I always lit. The soft hum of the air conditioner. The warm glow of the kitchen lights. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't the same anymore. Miles stepped out of the bathroom and asked why I was home so early. I smiled and answered casually. He hugged me from behind and teased, "Something special going on?" I chuckled lightly and said, "Just wanted to cook your favorite dish." I stood in the kitchen, slicing vegetables, but in my mind, the question screamed louder than ever. How could someone live two separate lives? How could he lie to the person he sleeps next to and still sleep peacefully at night? I needed to face him, but not yet. That night, I pretended to sleep, then slipped out of bed around midnight. I took his phone and opened a secret messaging app he had disguised as a work notes folder. The name was clean, innocent, but inside, it was hell. Messages filled the screen, from cheap flirting to detailed rendezvous plans right inside my house. There were days when I had only just stepped out for 10 minutes and Vanessa had already entered through the back door. They even had a system, time slots to avoid suspicion. Miles had written to her, "You're like air to me. She never understands how much I need you." She was me. The wife he once vowed to cherish. The woman who stayed up countless nights caring for him. Who turned down promotions just to be home for our so-called family. And now, in his eyes, I was the one who didn't understand. The next morning, I called Lena. I didn't even have to say much. My voice was barely trembling when she asked, "Was it him?" I nodded, holding back tears. She was at my place within 30 minutes. We sat at my kitchen table. I showed her the videos, the screenshots, the entire archive. She didn't say much. She just placed her hand on my shoulder and said, "We'll make them pay. But not like victims do." I nodded. And for the first time in days, I didn't feel pain in my chest. What I felt was clarity. I printed out all the messages into a document, saved the videos onto a hard drive, wrote everything down in a journal, step by step, not to cause a public scene, but to end it. In a way they'd never forget. My plan started with a simple text message to Vanessa. It was an invitation for afternoon tea on Saturday. I acted like I knew nothing, like we were still just polite neighbors who shared casual smiles and friendly chatter. She replied in under 5 minutes. Her message said, "I'd love to. I have a few new cake recipes I want you to try." The irony was suffocating. The woman sleeping with my husband was baking for me like everything was fine. I gave a faint smile. Yes, I would try her cake, but it would be on a much more memorable occasion. Lena and I stayed up for 2 nights preparing every detail. We made a checklist of what to print, which screenshots to include, and how exactly to bring Nathan, Vanessa's husband, into the picture. Nathan was a lawyer. His schedule was packed and he traveled often. But Lena had a mutual friend who used to work with Nathan, and through that, we found out exactly when he'd be home. It would be Sunday afternoon, the day after I met Vanessa for tea. I had everything I needed. Now the pieces could finally come together. On Sunday morning, I woke up early and made breakfast for Miles like usual. He kissed me on the cheek and thanked me for the eggs and hot coffee. I looked at him with calm eyes, hiding the storm that was already forming inside me. I told him I was heading to my mom's to help her choose wallpaper. He nodded and wished me a good day. Before I left, he asked if I wanted him to order something special for dinner. I smiled and said, "No need. Tonight will be special enough." I drove to a quiet coffee shop where Lena and I finalized everything. She had printed all the screenshots in high resolution, color-coded, and organized them into a thick folder. We placed the evidence into 2 large envelopes. One would go to Vanessa, the other to Nathan. We arrived at Nathan's house right on schedule. I rang the doorbell and my heart was pounding so hard I had to take a deep breath just to steady myself. Nathan opened the door, visibly surprised to see me standing there. I gave him a small smile and asked if we could talk for a few minutes. Lena stood next to me, silent but steady. Nathan invited us in and made some tea. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him directly, "You should know that your wife and my husband have been having an affair. It's been going on for 8 months." I handed him the envelope. He opened it and didn't speak for the next 10 minutes. He flipped through every page, every photo, and every message. His face slowly drained of color. His eyes shifted from confused to stunned to furious. Still, he said nothing. He nodded once, stood up, told us to wait there, and walked out the door. I knew exactly where he was going. That was part of the plan. I picked up my phone and texted Miles. "I'm on my way home. Need to talk." Then I messaged Vanessa. "Thanks again for yesterday. Do you have time to stop by this afternoon? There's a cake I really want you to try." She responded with a smiley face. "Of course, I'd love to." Lena and I drove home. Nathan was already there, waiting by the front door. His expression was tight, filled with restrained anger. I nodded at him as I walked inside. Everything was unfolding exactly as it should. 10 minutes later, Vanessa arrived. She wore a pale blue dress and held a cake box in her hands. She stepped in with a bright smile and said, "Hi, I brought the..." She froze mid-sentence. Her eyes landed on Nathan sitting on the couch. Miles was next to him. He stood halfway up when he saw her and froze as well. No one said a word. The silence felt thick, like a wire pulled so tight it might snap at any second. I stepped into the middle of the room and placed the second envelope on the coffee table. Since we're all here, I think now's the perfect time for everyone to try the cake I made. It wasn't a real cake. It was a harsh serving of truth. Miles picked up the envelope and opened it. Out spilled the photos, the text messages, and the videos. They dropped into the room like blades, slicing through every ounce of silence. Vanessa stood frozen. Nathan didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on me and gave me a small nod. It was his silent way of saying thank you. Miles tried to speak, but his throat caught. No words came out. He stepped toward me, but I stepped back. I looked at both of them and spoke in the calmest voice I had ever used. "I know everything. I've known for a while, but I wanted you both to see yourselves through someone else's eyes. Sneaky, dishonest, and cowardly." Vanessa started crying. She turned to Nathan and begged him to forgive her. Miles looked at me and said it was a moment of weakness, that he got carried away, that it was just a stupid mistake. I looked him in the eyes and said, "A mistake doesn't last 8 months, and emotions don't sneak through the back door." No one said another word. I turned around, walked into the bedroom, and pulled out the 3 suitcases I had packed days ago. I rolled them out to the front door and placed them down. "These are your things. You can take them with you, along with all your lies. After that day, I almost disappeared from everything that once belonged to my old life. Miles left the house just 1 hour after I handed him those 3 suitcases. He begged me to talk, tried to explain that it was all just a stupid mistake. He even got down on his knees and said he didn't want to lose me. But I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel hurt either. All I felt was distance. The man standing in front of me was no longer the husband I once loved and shared every little thing with. He was someone else entirely. A stranger who knew this kitchen, this refrigerator, this bed, but had no idea about my self-respect and the final line he had crossed. The next morning, I filed for divorce. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. I asked for a legal division of assets, but requested to keep the house. Not because I had any emotional attachment left, but because I didn't want that woman to ever set foot here again. Miles tried to win me back using the same old tricks. He sent flowers to my office, long-winded emails, late-night messages saying he couldn't sleep and kept dreaming about me leaving forever. But what he didn't understand was that I had already left. From the moment I discovered the truth, my heart was no longer with him. As for Vanessa, I heard that Nathan kicked her out the same night. Her bank accounts were frozen. Mutual friends stopped talking to her. She used to be known as the perfect woman in our neighborhood. Now she had become the subject of whispered judgment and cold stares. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall. I simply felt like things were falling into place. Like a room finally being cleaned after years of collecting dust. In the weeks that followed, I started rebuilding my life on my own. I changed the locks, got rid of anything that reminded me of Miles, redesigned the bedroom, rearranged my workspace. It felt like every time I moved an object, I was also putting the broken pieces of myself back together. Some nights I'd wake up with my heart racing, as if I had just stepped out of a nightmare. I'd turn on the light and look around. No one was there. The room was empty, but it wasn't scary. I learned to breathe slowly, place my hand over my chest, and remind myself that I was okay. I was alive. I was starting over. Lena stayed by my side during the hardest days. She'd come over every Friday night with a bottle of wine and a stack of old movies. We'd sit on the couch and talk about the most random things. About our college days, about the dreams we never chased, and about whether it was still possible to believe in love again. One evening she asked me, "If you could go back, would you still want to know the truth?" I stayed quiet for a while. Then I nodded. Because if I hadn't known, I would have kept living a lie. I would have kept smiling at the man who betrayed me every day. I would have kept believing I was happy while my trust was being drained away piece by piece. The truth hurt, but it was the only way I could be free. I returned to work with a new kind of energy. I started accepting projects I had once turned down out of concern for family time. I redesigned a small apartment in the city. It was the first project I took on alone after the divorce. When the client looked at me and said, "This apartment makes me feel like I can start over," I almost cried. Because I was starting over too. But this time, I was doing it for myself. 1 year after the afternoon I rolled Miles' suitcases out the front door, my life had completely changed. I no longer woke up with the weight of hidden lies behind a smile. I no longer had to guess the mood of a man just to avoid being hurt. I was no longer the woman constantly adjusting herself to fit into a relationship that was breaking apart day by day. I now lived alone in a small apartment near the coast. It wasn't big or luxurious, but it was the only place where I felt completely like myself. Every morning, I woke up to the soft sunlight streaming through the window. I made myself a cup of mint tea, turned on a familiar instrumental playlist, and sat on the balcony just to breathe. Some days I painted. Other days, I did nothing at all. But I no longer felt guilty about it. I had learned that slowing down didn't mean I was lost or lazy. It was how I learned to listen to myself. I saw Nathan again once, at an art exhibition in the city. He was there with a friend, and I was standing in front of an abstract painting, holding a glass of wine. When our eyes met, we both smiled. There was no bitterness, No resentment. Just two people who had been hurt, now peaceful enough to greet each other with a glance. Nathan told me he had moved to a different state. He had finalized the divorce and was starting over. We sat together for a while, exchanged a few stories. Neither of us mentioned Vanessa or Miles. We didn't need to. I don't know if I still believe in love, but I know one thing for sure. I believe in myself. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I've been weak. I've accepted things I didn't deserve. But I made it through, by waking up to the truth and holding on to my own worth. No one saved me from the pain. I saved myself. Someone once asked me if I could go back in time, would I change anything? I thought about it for a long time, and my answer was no. Because if I hadn't fallen, I wouldn't have learned how to stand back up on my own. If I hadn't been betrayed, I would have never had the courage to leave my comfort zone. And if I hadn't known the darkness, I wouldn't understand how strong I had to be to chase the light. Now, I don't need someone to come into my life to make me happy. I just need someone who's willing to build happiness with me. And even if there's no one else, I'm still okay. Because I've learned how to love myself first. I used to think I'd always be the victim in my own story, but then I realized I didn't need anyone to stand up for me. I could stand up for myself and write the rest of the story on my own. I no longer blame the ones who betrayed me. I understand now that if someone doesn't know how to appreciate you, no amount of sacrifice will ever be enough. I also stopped pretending to be strong all the time. I learned to sit with my pain, to face the sleepless nights and the quiet tears. And from that place, I rose stronger, steadier, and more free than I've ever been. If you're in a relationship that makes you feel small, makes you question your worth, please remember this. You weren't born to be hurt, to live in silence, or to carry the weight alone. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to start over. You have the right to live a life where you're loved with kindness, not pity or lies. And if you ever need someone to remind you of that, come back here. Because at her side of the story, we tell real stories from the voices of women who chose truth and chose to live a life they truly deserve.